This is Sam Long.
I'm John Nugent.
And I am Ron Peters.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. Glad to have you along. We talked about previously the end of the school year, but this year we've got two endings of school years.
Right.
We just have finished up our first and our first ever graduate class. So our master's program is our first year, knocked it out. What's going on over here?
I don't know. Ron is nowhere near his microphone. He's engrossed in the sound quality.
I'm trying to watch what's going on over here. So we've been talking about how maybe the volume hasn't been perfect. So yes, I was watching a little bit, but I was still listening to you guys. So forgive me for wanting to improve the quality of our broadcast. Do we want to start all over again, or are we just going to keep going?
No, I think the forgiveness will be contingent upon the results.
All right, then. So anyway.
Like Sam was saying, we just wrapped up our first year of the Master of Practical Theology program at Great Lakes.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's summertime. We don't have a lot of new news yet because technically while we're recording, like, we just graduated the students and, you know, the grad program is in its last weeks. But by the time this releases, it will be over. And we have succeeded in meeting our goal for the year of how many students we needed to carry and cover all the expenses of the program. And next year, the goal is to build.
Yep.
Right? We need the program to grow from being sustainable to thriving and profitable. And that's where you, our listeners, come in. If you really enjoy our podcast and the kind of theological instruction you get, and we know a lot of our listeners are in church leadership positions, you know, then you should think seriously about the Master of Practical Theology. It's a well-rounded degree. It's kind of like a mini MDiv. There's a little bit of Old Testament, a little bit of New Testament, practical ministry, missiology, hermeneutics, church history, right? It's just a little bit of everything.
This could be a selling point or a detrimental. It doesn't include languages, which is one thing that separates it from an MDiv. So you're like, I don't want to learn Greek and Hebrew. You don't have to.
Right.
If you want to learn Greek and Hebrew, sorry.
We can't help you with that, right?
You have to wait till the next, you know, as this program grows, maybe one of the first degrees we'll add is an MA that focuses in biblical studies.
That'd be awesome.
And has to lead with the languages. Yeah. But anyway, it's just a well-rounded program, and the results from our students who've been through the first year is they're just loving it. Yep. And so we're really excited about that. And to let you know, in case you don't know already, for those of you who are not sure, you know, like, I could probably enjoy some grad level instruction, but I'm not sure I want to do a 36-hour degree. We have a certificate, a series of certificates that we offer in graduate studies. A certificate in Old Testament, certificate in New Testament, certificate in theology, applied theology, and ministry. And so if either of those areas are, you know, something that you'd like to beef up on at the graduate level,
right,
you can select the courses that belong to that track and complete a certificate. And if you love it and you want more, well, do 2 more certificates and you have the degree.
Yeah, the degree, that's right.
Because each certificate is 12 credits, so 4 classes. And that's, for a lot of people, that's very doable. You know, you could do that easily in a year.
Yeah, basically doing 2 classes a year and you can finish it in 2 years.
2 years, right, yeah.
Or for those who want to slow walk it, if you want to rush, all right, I just want an intense year, well, you can find a way.
Yeah, exactly.
We offer 3 trimesters, so you could take 3 classes a year, and the 4th, and it's just over a year to complete it if you wanted to still go easy, but go a little quicker.
Yeah, 1 class in the fall, 1 in the spring, take the whole winter off. Or maybe the winter months when you get bored and stir crazy.
That'd be the time to do it.
Would rather have it. And we do take a pretty big break for the holidays.
Yep.
A 2-week-long breaks so that those don't get interrupted. But anyway, something to think about.
Yeah.
And if you do decide to apply, go to Great Lakes' website, glcc.edu, and click on the application form. And you just fill out a brief form to let people know of your interest and tell them that you heard it from us.
That's right.
Because it asks a question, where'd you learn about the program?
Click on other Say After Class podcast.
All those kickbacks we get from those.
I know, right? Yeah. all that money flowing into our accounts,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Anyway, that's our news for today. Thanks, Sam, for kicking us off. And Ron for joining us around the table.
Yeah, glad I could be here. Yeah. I know. I keep looking back there. I keep checking, the waveforms and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. But I'm with you. Like, I'm engaged. Don't think I'm not engaged here. I'm engaged. Yeah. I'm engaged. I'm going to keep saying that. I'm engaged.
We're going to continue our series now on how Christians ought to relate to the governing authorities. And we're still continuing to sample from the Bible story, right? And we've talked about, if you want to truly understand this topic, you just don't go to like the one verse that seems to support your view.
Right.
You need a more holistic biblical understanding of who are the governing authorities, what role do they play in God's purposes for the world, and how does that role interact with the role that Christians have as part of the church?
Right.
And so we've given some important backgrounds in previous weeks, talking about Babel and kind of the origin of the powers and principalities, but we also talked about how Scripture frames the governing authorities, especially in the Old Testament. And we learned that they are instruments of God.
Mm-hmm.
Though they may be ignorant that God is using them, God is nonetheless using them, and He will judge them for their abuse of the power that they have on loan from Him.
Right.
And so they don't get a free pass just because God uses them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even get a divine endorsement because God uses them.
They tend to overestimate their role in God's plan. It's like, you're just a tool.
Yeah, right. But sometimes he uses really personal language, like they are his possession. Yeah. Sometimes he uses language like in Isaiah, like his people, which is very strong language that he often reserves for Israel. Mm-hmm. They have a complex role in relationship to God. And one of the things we also learned, especially from Habakkuk and Jeremiah, is that God sometimes uses nations that are evil and fundamentally unjust to accomplish purposes at the expense of nations like Israel, who are more just by comparison.
Yeah.
And God's people, including Habakkuk, find that to be a breach of divine justice.
Yeah.
And God's message through Habakkuk is, no, God knows what he's doing. And even though you think that this nation should not be God's instrument to bring about justice because their ruler is abhorrent or their track record is abhorrent, doesn't mean God in this season hasn't raised up that nation for a specific purpose that's in the best interest of global history and maybe even salvation history.
Yeah, and I think it's really a call to trust God in His perspective, to say, God, this doesn't make sense. From my point of view, this does look like injustice. And God's saying, I understand from your point of view, but are you willing to trust the fact that I know the big picture, I see where all the chess pieces are moving, and that in the long run, this is going to accomplish my purposes? And say, you know what, God? Yes, you are smarter than I am. You see things better than I do. And yes, I am going to put my trust in your justice and let you work things out in the way that you know best. It's a very humbling place to put ourselves. Yeah. Necessarily so.
Yeah. So Scripture says some pretty exalted things, lofty things about nations that don't deserve it. And there are other passages like Daniel and Revelation that frame nations as the beasts that they are.
Right.
You get into like apocalyptic literature, which to your point, Ron, like we're looking at things from a human perspective, and the apocalyptic literature looks at it from a divine, like God down perspective. So we'd like transition to a whole different genre just to get the point across. Yeah. Right. That you're not getting it. So now look at it from here. And to do that, you have beasts and all sorts of weird things that we talked about that like sort of, I don't know, maybe it's to like sort of shake you out of your thought pattern, right?
Yeah.
To get you out of that silo, say, in order to do that, we're gonna have to like bring out some like 7-headed dragon out of the sea. Now I'm paying attention, and so that's what they've got to do.
Wow, that dragon's so cool. No, it's not that cool.
So it's like, don't get too critical of the nations to think that God can't be using them, or that based on your assessment of them, whether God is in their corner in this moment, in this season. You can't do that. And at the same time, don't get cozy with them. They're beasts.
That's the big thing,
And they're beasts that will fall. Like the story of all the beasts in Revelation and in Daniel is that they have power for a season, and God allows them to have that, and then God strips them of their power.
Yep.
And the ones that are more horrific than others, they lose their power in perhaps a more egregious way, more decisive way
Yep.
than other beasts that are less ferocious, especially at the expense of God's people.
The fuzzy bunnies, it's still a beast, but it's a fuzzy bunny. So
Yeah. So what we ended as we transitioned out of the beast by talking about this odd connection that Satan has to the nations. And we see this especially exclusively really in the New Testament, where, there's the God of this world that Satan, in tempting Jesus, can offer Jesus the nations if Jesus will bow to him. And there's this weird association of Satan with the nations. And that does carry into Revelation, where the beast is, the Roman Empire. And at the same time, the beast is Satan. And
mirror images of each other.
Yeah, lumped together, interpreted in light of one another. There's this correlation between Satan and Rome.
Yeah.
Which is a smaller version of the correlation the rest of the New Testament has between Satan and the nations and the kingdoms of this world. And so, and that comes as a surprise. All the kinds of things the Old Testament says about the nations, and doesn't say about Satan, that they are brought together, seems sudden, unexpected. On what basis can he offer Jesus the kingdoms of the world?
Yeah.
Whoa, and we alluded to the fact that this phenomenon makes the best sense by understanding Satan's place among what Paul calls in the New Testament, translated into English, the powers and principalities. Yeah. And so that's going to be the focus of this episode. When we hear powers and principalities language, we often think about spiritual warfare, right? And if anyone who's read Frank Peretti books, you think about individuals who are going through personal temptation, and there's like a spiritual warfare angel that's fighting against a little spiritual warfare demon. And, there's this spiritual warfare going on behind the scenes that's behind our personal struggles with sin.
Yeah.
But the powers and principalities topic is bigger than that.
Agree. Yeah.
And that kind of personalized individual sin spiritual warfare is a minor theme. It's a minor component of the New Testament's teaching about the powers and principalities. But there's this bigger component, and it has everything to do with how we can see Satan as being somehow in charge of the nations.
Yeah.
It's the context for interpreting the Satan in relation to the nations theme. And it's a concept that is... the whole story world of it is very specific to Paul, but not entirely unique. We have anticipations of this in the Old Testament and especially in the intertestamental literature. But before we kind of launch into that story, can you help us for a little bit, Ron, with the language, the Greek language behind the phrase powers and principalities?
Yeah, the New Testament uses a lot of different words, kind of overlapping, but at the same time having their own unique definitions. Like authority, exousia, having more to do with like that more abstract idea of these are the people who have authority over us. It's like that top-down, people are under our authority. So the authorities, the exousias, are, I'm using English plural, but that comes up a lot. It's a very common word. But another word would be archons, or arche is a word that's related to it, which is more specific to being rulers. And so you have the people who are the rulers, and it's like the rulers they exercise authority, and it's that idea. And it makes me think of like Mark 10, where Jesus says, the rulers of the world, exercise authority over each other. You're not supposed to do that. And so it's words like that. Those are the kinds of terms, and I think those, like exousia, is probably the most common term for authority. And there are other words like archon is a common word.
And that's the one that comes into English often as principality.
Yeah, it depends on the translation. I was thinking some other translation. But I mean, you have to have other words, like little words like tyrants, that comes up at times. And it might, oh man, I'm afraid I'm going to go like off into the tall weeds of that. I'm going to just back up and say those are the two most common words, the authorities and the powers.
Yeah. And so, if we think about those terms in relation to, world governments, it's very clear who the rulers and authorities are.
Yeah.
It's the kings, it's the officials, it's the rulers in the American context, it's the presidents, it's the Congress, it's mayors and governors of cities and states. In the context of spiritual warfare, we think about, okay, now powers, principalities, this is like angelic forces, right? Or demonic forces on the side of evil or whatever. And so, and what's helpful to think about as we approach the subject of powers and principalities, that in Greek, when it's talking about these heavenly powers and principalities, it's the same Greek words as when it's talking about earthly powers and principalities. And so, like in Romans, the language is rulers and authorities, but it's still using powers and principalities Greek terms.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ephesians, when it's talking about heavenly rulers and authorities, powers and principalities, it's the same exact Greek terms. Right. And that's lost in translation because, the translators are going, like in Romans, saying, all right, Paul's not talking about spiritual warfare here, so let's just translate it rulers and authorities. Mm-hmm. So people will think about the government, the human government. But now when we know Paul is talking about angelic forces or supernatural forces above, beyond the human realm, well, let's call that the more abstract phrase, powers and principalities. And so in our mind, they're two different spheres because different words are used, right? In the Greek mind, it's the same term. And it's the same term not because they have the same phrase that's used sometimes of earthly rulers and sometimes of heavenly. It's the same term because the powers and principalities are a system of world governance that includes both earthly rulers and heavenly rulers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because, even if you go beyond that, you have basileus for king, kurios for lords. Like you have all these different terms that are used for not only the broad government like Rome, but as you said, the local aristocracy in these large cities like Ephesus or Corinth or whatever. It's a mixture of terms that describe their function, but the way that they present themselves to the population is that the gods have placed us in power, and we are working together with them. You can't talk about a worldly power without thinking of the gods saying, we've organized the chessboards and this is the people that we want in charge. And so there isn't this like a binary between like the material and the non-material, but it's both of them working together. And those are the same people who are like running the temples and all of that. And so if you're like rebelling against the governing authorities in your city, they're going to say, you're not just rebelling against us, but you're making Zeus mad or Artemis or whoever. And the last thing we want to do is have them mad at our city because they'll bring ruin upon us. So yeah, there is no distinction. It's like to rebel against one is to rebel against the other. And we can't suggest that, you can speak against those spiritual ones and do your spiritual warfare and not take into account that the human agents are their agents. That's how that would have been viewed.
Yeah, so if we were to picture this, it wouldn't be two different pictures. Like in this passage, we're talking about earthly rulers who fight earthly battles between humans. And another picture, we're using that phrase, powers and principalities, to talk about spiritual rulers who are fighting spiritual battles, which are different things, right? For them, this is one picture, and a world in which God is over all of creation. Mm-hmm. God is sovereign over all creation, and underneath God are heavenly beings that have authority on loan from God, who are responsible for stewarding the nations. And then underneath those heavenly beings are earthly rulers who are the human agents of the angelic stewardship.
Yep.
So like you were saying, Ron, to offend the earthly rulers is to offend the heavenly ruler who's over those earthly rulers. And vice versa. To attack or to deny the heavenly ruler is an affront to the earthly ruler, who serves them.
Yeah.
And no wonder, other nations get offended when the Jews deny the reality of their heavenly rulers. You're undercutting the political authority of the earthly rulers.
That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why, like, we're so used to, like, at least in America, this idea of separation of church and state, which I think that, that word comes from a recognition of that traditional view of how the state is the agent of the heavenly powers, and to say we're going to pull back from that and we're going to separate them out. And I'm sure there's more to the conversation, but you have to see that as a reaction to the way that humanity has viewed political power for millennia, that politics and religion reinforced one another. And so the earthly rulers are the agents of the heavenly powers. And you can't rebel against them because you're rebelling against, God himself, so to speak. And if you're going to understand the Bible, you got to understand that that's how these people understood it. They're not 21st century Americans. These are people who view the world through that lens.
Yeah, and a significant difference between and this lumping together of the heavenly rulers with the earthly rulers as if they're part of a common chain of authority that work in tandem with each other. That was very ancient Near Eastern. Yeah. Would you say, Sam?
For sure.
And then we see those categories brought into the New Testament, and we're going to see in the Old Testament as well to a lesser extent. In our day, you still have the earthly rulers who think they're connected with deity, but they bypass the angelic level, right? Like, so, presidents, invoke God as being on their side and, invoke God's blessing and attribute God glory when they succeed. They don't talk about God's angels or the prince of the nation who is the angelic or other kind of superhuman being that is the specific steward of their nation. So we've kind of cut out the middleman, and our world ruler just go straight to God. So when we get into the New Testament and we see this language of powers and principalities, we need to see them as a chain of authority from earthly rulers through heavenly rulers, also under God's authority. And so that's the scene we're going to set. And we have a list of verses here that's going to kind of show that this is not entirely new to Paul in the New Testament. It has some Old Testament background that's in the mix. So, Sam, you want to lead that?
Yeah. We're going to start in Daniel, and Daniel chapter 10. And basically, Daniel has encountered this figure. Some say it's Gabriel. He's not named. And so he falls down on his face because he doesn't know what's about to happen other than him perhaps dying. And then verse 10 says this, "But then a hand touched me and roused me to my hands and knees. He said to me, 'Daniel, greatly beloved, pay attention to the words that I'm going to speak to you. Stand on your feet, for I have now been sent to you.' So while he was speaking this word to me, I stood up trembling. He said to me, 'Do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. So Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. And I left him there with the princes of the kingdom of Persia, and have come to help you understand what is to happen to your people at the end of days. For there's a further vision for those days.'" If we skip to verse 18, it says, "Again, one in human form touched me and strengthened me. He said, 'Do not fear, greatly beloved. You are safe. Be strong and courageous.' When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, 'Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me.' Then he said, 'Do you know why I have come to you? Now I must return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I am through with him,'" which the prince of Greece will come. "But I am to tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is no one with me who contends against these princes except Michael, your prince." So I don't know if a lot of people who know this passage exists. It's kind of weird and bizarre. And the point is, of course, to encourage Daniel and say it's under control. It seems like it's spiraling out of control, but in fact, things are happening. But he kind of opens the curtain a little bit to sort of peek into what you were saying about this expectation that it's like Michael is specifically the angelic prince of the Jews. There's this other guy who's, we're not sure who he's affiliated with, except sort of the Jews, but not necessarily entirely. And they're fighting in the heavenly realms he's called the Prince of Persia, but it's probably not, it's not the physical human prince. It's probably another like angelic type of prince. And that they're actually up there fighting in the same time while the Persians are fighting down here, the actual So it's this weird, like I said, sort of glimpse into a lot of what we've been saying that's actually in a text that I don't think people even know exists.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes me think of, it's not unique to Israel. You know,
Right.
in the Iliad, the whole battle of the Greeks with Troy is just spillover from an argument that the gods had among themselves, and it leads them into battle. And so Israel has a very similar view to how the world functions. And I like what you said there, Sam, about pulling back the curtain, because that's how apocalypse works. It's like the word, it's just a Greek word, and it just means to reveal. And it's like, we can't see what's going on, but God's going to do us a favor. He's going to pull back the curtain. It's almost like Toto pulling back the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. And it's like, it's not this fiery guy. It's just some dude pulling a bunch of levers, you know? You guys are staring at me like...
I get that reference.
Okay, good, because Sam was giving me like a blank stare. I'm like, you have seen this movie, right,
I was
Sam?
thinking of a funny joke, and I didn't get there. I was thinking Toto the band. I was thinking an Africa joke?
Africa.
Rosanna? I don't know. I couldn't get there.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Went a different route. But all that is to say that God is trying to show us that there is a cosmic conflict that's going on. And in God, the way God reveals it to us, we know that God always wins and his forces are on the winning side. And so when it feels like we're on the losing side, we have to recognize that God is actually at work there and he's got forces that are working. And so the idea of, you know, the angel of Persia and all that is part of that cosmic drama that's taking place that God gives us a privileged view into.
Yeah. And in Daniel, it's not clear whether Daniel is trying to give them a bird's eye view of, the angelic battles behind the earthly battles. I mean, since this is apocalypse, it could be that, in earlier chapters, you had beasts with horns representing nations.
Right.
And in this chapter, you have heavenly princes representing nations. Those beasts with horns really don't exist.
Right.
They're kind of mythological constructs. In the same way, it could be said that these heavenly princes don't really exist. It's just apocalyptic formula code to talk about, God's coming, but, he's coming to rescue Israel, but he's also dealing with the Greek Empire and the Persian Empire and the Babylonian Empire, and all these are in the mix, and God's busy attending to them. He's going to get to you at just the right time.
Yeah.
So, interpreting Daniel is kind of ambiguous, right?
Correct.
Because it's just not clear he's trying to pull down the curtain to describe angelic reality, although he might be.
Yeah.
Right? And so you really need to see, are there other Old Testament passages that suggest that this isn't just an apocalyptic image? This is, in fact, a way that ancient Israelites viewed reality. And so we have a few more passages that point to that.
Yeah, I'm going to read Isaiah chapter 24, verses 21 to 23. It says, "On that day, the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven, and on earth, the kings of the earth. They will be gathered together like prisoners in a pit. They will be shut up in a prison, and after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be abashed, the sun ashamed, and the Lord of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and before his elders he will manifest his glory." And so there we have the hosts of heaven and the kings on earth, which sounds like that kind of apocalyptic imagery where you guys, with your natural eyes, you see the battle that's in front of you and you've got kings and generals and all the things like that. God adds a little bit to that there is also a counterpart, the hosts of heaven. And God says, I'm going to punish both of them. I'm going to throw them into a pit. And so, we get some of that same language in describing, our situation, but we get a little bit more, again, that privileged view behind the scenes.
Yeah, and here it's not clear what the heavenly hosts are being punished for. It could be like the earthly hosts or the earthly governors, kings, are being punished for the bad stuff they do on earth. And, the heavenly hosts are going to get punished because of that whole, orgy with humans they had back in the Son of God days. That has nothing to do with governing realities, right? Like, or a fall or disruption, or they're obeying God's commands up there.
Right.
Like, you have a judgment day. Angels are going to get in trouble for angel things, and human rulers are going to get, punished for human things. So it's not clear that there's any connection between the heavenly hosts and the earthly rulers, except that they're paired together.
Exactly, yeah.
But Psalm 82 maybe puts a little more flesh on it to specify what exactly is going on there. I'm going to read the whole Psalm. It's only 8 verses, and it might shed light on that. So it says, "God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you," presumably the gods in the heavenly council, Judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked. Give justice to the weak and the orphan. Maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk around in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I say, you are gods, children of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die like mortals and fall like any prince. Rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all nations belong to you. So this is a psalm about the nations.
Yep.
That they belong to God, and that the gods in the heavenly council are held accountable for the injustice among the weak, among the orphans, among the nations. And they here are going to die like any other prince or king, right? Any other, just like earthly rulers will die for their mismanagement of the poor and the needy in their realm, so you, heavenly hosts, will encounter God's judgment for the neglect of the needy and poor among the nations. And so here, the reason for their judgment is spelled out. Things are not going well on earth. And the nations are being held, and the angels, or heavenly council, the gods, are being held accountable to the mismanagement of human needs on earth. Sam.
So there's a lot in this because you have different time periods and different understandings of what's going on, right? Where like a psalm can call them gods, which would have been a very older perspective, that there were these sort of demigods that existed, one attributed to each nation, and so the high god, like the chief god, the Zeus, if you will, comes down and looks around like, you all aren't doing your jobs, like things are falling apart. What's going on? And so that would be that perspective. But the previous perspectives about there being these angelic being like Daniel, they're not gods anymore. They are lesser deities, but still have been empowered to do certain things. And you see kind of a progression that takes place. And so we're talking about them as the same, but the perspective has changed over time. And we need to keep that in mind. And so this reflects, for me, like an earlier perspective in the ancient Near East, which is that's how it worked, where you had like El as the chief god, and then the lesser deities, Baal and all the rest. And so that's how they viewed the world. And I think this filters over a little bit into Israel, but eventually they come to the point where like, no, there's one God. There's not demigods. There are other beings, divine, like this divine type council that exists, but they're not deities. But they do have jobs. And they're failing in their jobs, which is the point of the psalm.
Kind of a demotion that takes place, in terms of their position, their power, their authority, all of that. That they're not gods, like you said, but kind of reducing them to these lesser beings, like an angel or something along that lines. Am I tracking with you? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And I mean, historically, we see a progression in the Israelite mindset. Once upon a time, people like Abraham lived in a world where there were multiple gods.
That's right.
And then when the God of Israel revealed himself to Abraham, Abraham probably thought, oh, one of these gods is reaching out to me, right? And then so early Israel would have begun as polytheists.
Yeah.
And they come to understand that there is a territorial God who has taken notice of them and wants them to prosper. And then so they would have naturally in the early days thought of other gods as still existing, and maybe having responsibility over other territories, which is what the nations believe. And they grew up as members of the other nations, right? And they were in Egypt among other nations, right, who had this kind of worldview.
Which is why what you're saying earlier, if you were, say, the Hittites and you attack the Egyptians, you're not attacking just the Egyptians, you're attacking their God, and vice versa. And their gods are warring while you're down here fighting. And that goes back to the Daniel passage. And so it's for them, it was all tied together. I mean, even Moses, when God appears with a burning bush, do you remember what he said? So you tell me to go to the Israelites. Who am I supposed to tell them is sending me? Implying there's lots of choices here. Which one are you?
Yeah. Where do you
and that's
fit
why
in
this whole revelation of this new name is a big deal, because it's kind of like a new God on the block, so to speak, where he was probably expecting someone else. And like, oh, this is a whole new thing that's happening. And so even by the time of Moses, there's not monotheism is not a thing. really. And so that it takes time for them to come to that realization. Of course, by Daniel, they get it, but this is hundreds of years earlier.
Yeah, and this idea that the God that we worship is the God of the whole earth. Again, it's not a regional God. We're not competing with him. That this God literally runs the show in Egypt and Babylon, the Hittite empires and all that. Yeah, that's this massive revelation to go, oh, this is really, really messing up our cosmology here. But it shows how God reveals himself to be the God. And that's part of why he's jealous. It's like, no, these other regional gods don't cut it anymore.
Yeah. So Israel collectively would have first been polytheists, and Yahweh, the God of Israel, is one of the gods and their favorite one. And then they come to see him as the head god, like Zeus, over the other gods. And then later they come to understand, no, he is the one and only God. And then that requires them to now reframe what they thought about these other gods. And it ends up landing in a reframe of, no, these are like created angel beings under God, right? But it's important to see, so by the New Testament, there are no other gods, right? And really by the time of Daniel, there's only one God. And so you would talk about these beings who are over, they didn't get rid of the idea of heavenly beings over the nations. They got rid of the idea that these heavenly beings over nations are gods.
Yes.
And they've switched to, rather, they're angels under God's command. Remind me of a Striper song, but
That's right. I remember.
But why we take the time to do all this is like what we see in Daniel is a progression of how they came to understand. They never sloughed off the notion that there are divine beings over nations.
Yeah.
And this psalm is just kind of testimony of that these nations who are these angels or these divine beings who are going to fall under God's judgment are being judged because of the way things are going for humans on earth. Their responsibility is not to be great stewards of the heavenly realm, but they are stewards in a real way of the earthly realm and over nations and territories. So injustices happen among the nations. Not only are the kings of those nations on trial because of that, but so are their heavenly counterparts. All right, moving on.
We can. So that is the background, the context that moves forward that Paul's going to adopt and sort of implement. And again, focusing on Daniel being more the understanding than the psalm, right? And so this is where we get to the big one of the big passages about how we interact with the government, Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. And Paul says this, keeping in mind when we read words like authority, this is what's in mind. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there's no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you wish to have no fear of the authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive its approval, for it is God's agent for your good. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid, for the authority does not bear the sword in vain. It is the agent of God to execute wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be subject not only because of wrath, but also because of conscience. For the same reason, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are God's agents, busy with this very thing. Pay to all what is due them, taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to whom respect is due, honor to whom honor is due.
Yeah, and here we're not really going to get into the teaching of this and how it applies to us in relating to government authorities. But just to note, the language here is powers and principalities language. And in this context, it just seems to be talking about earthly rulers.
Right.
But we need to look at some of these other verses and kind of get them all out there to see that sometimes this same language is used of these heavenly ones. So, Ron, you want to do 1 Corinthians 2?
Yep, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. Paul writes, Yet among the mature we do speak wisdom, though it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age, who are doomed to perish. But we speak God's wisdom, secret and hidden, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So there's that same ruler language that we've seen in these other passages.
And the rulers of the age crucified Jesus. And so that term here is broad enough to include, Pilate, and the soldiers, and maybe the high priests and
Yeah, I would
Jewish
agree with that,
rulers,
yep.
right, who were involved in that. So that language, again, powers and principalities, language world, but still seems to be talking about earthly rulers.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's generic enough that it captures everybody. The Romans are without excuse. The Jewish leadership is without excuse. They all fit in that same category.
Okay. And now the language is going to turn a little bit in Ephesians, and I'm going to jump in the middle of a verse, chapter 3, verse 10, and it's talking about the gospel and Paul's ministry to bring the gospel of Christ to the nations. In verse 10, so that through the church, the wisdom of God in its rich variety might now be known to the rulers and authorities in heavenly places. So that here's that powers and principalities, but now it's clearly talking about heavenly rulers and not earthly rulers. So here we see the overlap of language, and we're going to see more of that.
For example, later in Ephesians, in chapter 6, the big armor of God passage, it says, be strong, put on the whole armor. Why? So you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For our struggle is not against blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And so this is where a lot of people go to say, like, it's all, it's a fight against that devil who's against me, and I need my angel to get my back. But in the context, it's bigger than that. It's these forces, these particular authorities that are in heaven that also represent nations.
Yeah, get a little bit of that Frank Peretti language there too. Yeah, this present darkness.
Yeah, and this is really key. I think this is a key passage. Because when we get to this passage, we assume that our struggle, and then we personalize it. Yes. So my personal struggle with, the kind of shows I watch, or my personal struggle to control my tongue, my personal struggle is not just against me, it's against heavenly forces. And, but Paul's cosmology is bigger than this, right? For him, no, your struggle is not just your personal sin problem. Your struggle is this world is under the power of the evil one. Yeah. That the government is a spiritual domain of Satan. Yeah. That the conditions in which you have your livelihood, the persecution you deal with, the temptation you deal with, all of that is part of this heavenly stewardship over creation in which angelic beings have influence, and we struggle under that influence.
Yeah, and I think it's understandable when you live in a society where, as a general rule, you don't feel like the government is coming after you as a direct consequence of your faith in Jesus. It's easy to turn this into a personal kind of struggle. So I don't want to bag on people too much when they read it that way, but it's important to say that's not how Paul and his first audience was hearing it. They were definitely looking at the local authorities in their cities as having their sights trained on them. You guys you're rebelling against Rome, you're rebelling against the local gods, you're rebelling against their delegated authorities and the human agents who are ruling our cities. And they saw them as a threat to their livelihood, sometimes to their very lives. And so, like I said, when you don't experience that every day, it's very easy to reduce this to a personal conflict. But we have to put ourselves back into that place to say that was not their experience, and to recognize that they saw the powerful individuals and institutions in their cities as coming after them.
Yeah. All right. We have one more verse just to kind of get out there. Who are these powers? How does the scripture refer to them? Are they human? Are they angel? Is it both? Romans 8:38. Probably the most famous passage of them all.
Romans 8:38, which reads, Paul says, I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers. And it goes on, nor height and depth, and all that can separate us from the love of Jesus. But he just brings everything together in that single sentence. Like every one of the terms that we've been talking about is expressed that none of these things can separate us from God's love, but all of them lumped together in a single statement on the part of Paul.
Yeah, and here you have, so some verses, powers language appears to refer to just human rulers, and some verses that we've seen appear to be just angelic rulers. Mm-hmm. And this one is like, all right, so neither the human rulers or the angelic rulers, like none of them, or other kinds of powers and life and death can separate us from the love of God. They're lumped together here as an opposition. And we should think of them as being related in that lumping. You know, that death is a power that is wielded by Satan.
Yeah.
And he's associated with death in the Bible. And the triumph over death that Christ accomplished on the cross is simultaneously a triumph over Satan.
Yes.
The biggest weapon that the enemy, not just heavenly enemies, but also earthly rulers, it's the biggest weapon Pilate had, right? The biggest weapon Caesar had.
Yep.
None of these rulers and authorities, heavenly or earthly, and the strongest power they wield to control people's lives here on earth can separate us from God's love.
Exactly.
Can I bring up a translational point that annoys me? Like, I learned it as angels or demons, but it's not the word for demons. It's arche, one of the words we talked about. And so the translation of rulers or powers or something like that is the translation. Where they got, there's a word for demons. It's not used here.
Right, exactly.
And so
I didn't even realize that was in there.
NIV uses demons and others.
Okay.
And it's like, that's just, but that skews you the wrong way.
Sure.
It turns you to that pretty, like, I'm fighting against demons, when it's like, actually, you're fighting against other things. And that misses the point.
Yeah.
So they kind of frame it so that they're not even talking about human rulers at all.
Right.
Interesting.
I'm sure they're doing like the parallel angels and the opposite
That's what
demons.
I was exactly what I was thinking. They're thinking about those as.
But it makes some more sense with what we talked about
binary.
for the last 45 minutes to do angels and rulers.
Yeah, that's a pretty big jump there.
Yes.
I would not have made that choice translationally.
Because I remember memorizing it, and we read it like, it's angels and demons. And then I had to look it up quickly. Like, oh, no, the Greek word is not demons. It's arche. It's rulers or whatever.
Yeah.
And what we see in Colossians and Ephesians and Romans is there is a logical pairing of angelic and earthly and heavenly rulers, that they would be paired together the same way life and death are paired together. Like they come, angels and demons in the Jewish world, especially in the first century, were not paired groups.
Oh yeah, they're not binary opposites. Yeah.
Angels are heavenly figures under God's stewardship that have responsibility on loan from God to rule the earth. Demons are wandering spirits of the low places. They don't have authority over anything.
Right.
They can just be a pest
Yes.
to humans, and then humans actually can exercise authority over them.
Yeah.
In a way that they don't even come close to exercising authority over an angel.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, so that pairing is entirely anachronistic. Would you say?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
And they got it wrong. Sorry, NIV.
You got it. I wonder if the newest one fixes that.
Oh yeah, just go check that out.
Another time.
Yeah, we're not gonna do it right now.
Well, anyway, this is your introduction to the powers and principalities, who they are, some Old Testament background, some ancient Near Eastern background, but we just need to enter into the skin of those categories a little bit if we're to understand the story of the powers and principalities as Paul is going to tell it in the New Testament. And that's what the next episode, now that we know who the characters are, both heavenly and earthly rulers that exercise influence on earth, and that God's going to judge them for their mismanagement of their responsibility over the affairs of humans on earth. But Paul tells in Ephesians and Colossians a coherent story of these powers, where they came from, what their purpose is, what their relationship to Christ is, and what their future is. And that's what we're going to focus on next time.
In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of the After Class Podcast. After class because
The best conversations happen
after class.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the After Class Podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Social media pictures and descriptions are provided by Darren Harris. Audio mixing and editing is done by Drew Nyquist. If you've enjoyed this episode of ACP, you might also enjoy GLCC's Master of Arts in Practical Theology degree. In this 36-hour program, you will receive first-rate biblical and theological instruction from John, Ron, Sam, and several of their colleagues at Great Lakes Christian College. To learn more about this program, visit glcc.edu. Get practical and go deep at GLCC.